Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Paul Wax. I'm the Executive Director of ACT. I'd like to welcome everyone to this webinar, which is actually the beginning of a new webinar series that ACT is going to provide this year. And we're really excited about this series. It's been supported by Bayer, and we appreciate that support as we move forward. And the webinar series is about medical toxicology and industry, and we've constructed a brand new program this year that has both a rotation for medical toxicology fellows who are interested in getting an in-depth experience about medical toxicology and industry, as well as this webinar series, which is open to any of the members to get a little bit of a highlight of what medical toxicology industry is all about. I think, as most people appreciate, the majority of our members, come from emergency medicine. We also have some pediatricians, some internists, and many of them, practice in a clinical setting after they finish their training, which includes often a lot of emergency medicine and hopefully some medical toxicology as well. But there are other types of job venues that some of our members have pursued in the government and industry and working in public health. And I think bringing information about these other pathways to the folks that are in training and to the recent grads and to members who may be mid-career and looking for a change, I think it's going to be very valuable. So this is the first in a quarterly webinar series on this topic, and I'd like to turn it over to Liza Halcombe, who's helped organize this webinar series, and will introduce the panel. And again, Liza, thank you so much for taking the initiative with us and supporting this. I think this is really a great move for medical toxicology in terms of expanding our scope and focus. Thanks.
Well, thanks for giving us the opportunity to speak. This is going to be a very informal kind of session. We're going to spend time talking about our careers and how we wound up in the careers that we wound up in. I think it's kind of interesting because the path to medical toxicology is usually through emergency medicine, and then a lot of times you stay in the hospital and don't get to explore different avenues in toxicology. So I'm excited to offer some different insights from different parts of industry and the government that you can think about when you're working on ideas for your careers. So I'm Liza Dunn, formerly known as Halcombe. I'm the medical affairs lead for Bayer Crop Sciences, and we are going to have Dr. Ed Kuffner, who's the Chief Medical Officer for J&J, and Keith Burkhart, who's a Senior Advisor for Medical Toxicology for the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research at the FDA. We're going to tell you the stories of our careers and how we got here, and then open it up for a Q&A session. Now, I think we were supposed to have Andrew Erdman coming on. I don't see him on the panel yet, but hopefully he is able to sign in soon. And he is the Vice President and Global Head of Early Development and Safety for Hoffman La Roche. So looking forward to this conversation. And why don't we start with Keith? And maybe you can give us a brief talk on how you got started and how you wound up where you were. You're on mute.
Just noticed that my computer told me that. Thank you. And I guess my journey, I always like to talk about, long-term planning. And so I still remember when I interviewed for emergency medicine with Richard Levy at the University of Cincinnati. And in that interview, I told him I was going to be a medical toxicologist. Before I started my emergency medicine residency there in Cincinnati many years ago. So that was always my interest, and that even going into emergency medicine to start with. And one of my goals was always to be able to spend 100% of my time doing medical toxicology. I always learned in academics, I was told focus, although, you know, we're in two specialties, emergency medicine and medical toxicology, which have a huge knowledge base or database for which you can learn and work on. So we kind of go against that academic mold from, you know, way back in the 70s and 80s that I grew up, is be an expert on one thing, and that especially. But here we're made a career out of trying to be an expert on a lot of things all at the same time through there. But I always felt that, you know, you have the emergency medicine, and I still wanted to focus that a little bit more just on medical toxicology for my career. So as I started in emergency medicine, you know, trained in Denver and that through there, doing some research, and ended up coming back to my home area here, Hershey, Pennsylvania. Close to my family was my choice as far as for that academic career. And you know, you started out with half my time emergency medicine and half my time medical toxicology. And fortunately, you know, worked with Dr. Donovan, as many of you may know, and the two of us with some, you know, having some people stop along the way for a little bit. But the two of us focused on creating a situation where we could be full-time medical toxicology. And that was essentially creating an inpatient toxicology service. And it was the two of us, and that essentially, I always tell people that I started my career in emergency medicine, med tox, being on call every other night for 15 years, as far as the training that gave me the knowledge base here to bring to the FDA, as far as for that transition. You know, 15 years after I started my residency is when I transitioned over there. And I'll just throw in, you know, I'm thinking of it in that too. The FDA joining jobs, they often like people who, their medical officers, haven't been out in the real world clinical experience for a number of years, and then bringing that experience and that to the FDA. And helping with the regulatory decision makings that we do here. And I look back at that time, and, you know, the one thing, it's been just 2 or 3 years ago now that I've actually stopped clinical care. And that when Ward retired, there just wasn't where I was working at that time in Harrisburg, the Pinnacle Health system, with our the inpatient service, and that through there that it transitioned and became a consult service later in that career. But yeah, I only stopped seeing patients just a couple of years or so ago, and I truly do miss that. We would bring some of what I saw there, even while I was working at the FDA, and they encourage you to people to maintain their clinical practice. So I set it up that 10% of my time, and that's what they give you. That's kind of like the NIH model. And that, so to speak, if you know your NIH researchers, they spend half a day in the clinic, and then the rest of their time is focused on research. So out of that model, the FDA has that similar thing where they encourage 10% of your time, and that to be in clinical practice. And, you know, my boss was asking me, "You aren't doing that clinical practice anymore here recently?" And I said, "Well, the opportunity is not quite there anymore." But they do encourage that, and that's a nice thing. That's one way of doing it, is within your time at the FDA. The second way is actually you can do it as an outside activity. And so some other physicians choose to do that and make a little extra money on the sideline on that as well. So there's two ways of still seeing patients as you work for the FDA. Important thing I know we all start with a lot of our patient care activity, and many people want to maintain that. And so I just wanted to share that as well. But yeah, I always thought, you know, that was the one thing I kind of expected or planned that I would. Always thought, you know, that towards the latter part of my career, I would want to transition and take this to public health service. Being on call every other night as you're getting towards your 50s gets a little tough through there, and where I was. And so I always thought that this might work, and circumstances happened that I ended up being there a little sooner than that long-term planning would be. But, you know, that's what it is. Through there. So that's kind of how I ended up here. It was, and I really, the other thing I owe is, I mean, it's my work with the ACMT and the opportunities that came from it back when, especially when I was on the board of directors, and the interactions that I had with the government, both my state and the federal government, as far as for finding a place to transition into for government service. That's how I got here. Did you want me to stop there and then get back to a little bit more what I do a little later?
Yes, so that's what we'll do. So I'll go ahead and have Ed, you kick off and tell us how you got where you were, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. No, thanks so much. And for me, I think kind of similar to Keith a little bit. I think at the end of the day, you can plan things out. But what I would say is you need to be opportunistic when opportunities present themselves. And so I did my ER training at Bellevue NYU, and that's really where I got interested in toxicology, working with Dr. Goldfrank and the many great toxicologists in the poison center there. I knew I wanted to do a tox fellowship, so I went out to Rocky Mountain and did my tox fellowship at Rocky Mountain, and then stayed on there for 8 more years after. Was an assistant director at the poison center there. But that research project, and I tell the story when I first got out there, like, what, you're going to have to do a research project. And I thought to myself, I don't know, man. I love clinical medicine. I'm not really into research. And so I ended up doing a research project, which really I enjoyed, on alcohol and acetaminophen. And we did multiple studies over time. That led me to get to know some of the people at McNeil at the time as part of Johnson & Johnson. And so I literally was not looking for a job, and I'd gotten to know some people there. And as the story goes, I said to my wife, I don't know, sometime, 10, 15 years in the future, right around now, it may be fun towards the end of my career to go work for a company like J&J. Well, they offered me a job, and I think this is where the opportunistic part comes in. And I thought to myself, well, they said you could be the medical director for Tylenol. And I'd gotten to know Dr. Temple, Tony Temple, who some people may know. He was another toxicologist, worked at the company actually for like 20 years. And I thought to myself, well, what happens if I don't take the job and somebody else has that job for 20 years? I may never get to be the medical director for Tylenol. So we took the job and got into the company. I started in medical affairs, then took on some more responsibilities doing clinical research. Was lucky enough within the company actually to travel, and I went for 2 years to Switzerland with my family, and I was the head of regulatory for Europe. And for the past about 4 years, I've been the chief medical officer for J&J's consumer division, and I lead the safety team. And so we are involved in a lot of safety assessments. But what I can tell you is that I've been in the company 16 years, and every single day I use my tox training. And there's no question about it. And that's something that has really kept me in industry. And so, like Keith was saying, I miss taking care of patients. I love taking care of patients. The company has been very gracious. Back when COVID started, I got to go, and I went for 6 weeks and helped out in the ER back right at the beginning of the pandemic up in New York City when they were getting slammed. And actually just a few weeks ago, at the beginning of January, when things were heating up in New York City with Omicron, I just asked the company, can I go back? And I was up there for 2 weeks working, volunteering in the ER up there. And so, like Keith, like you say, I think there's opportunities, and I encourage people on our team. We've had Tammy Schaefer, who some people may know, she joined our team. I encourage people who join our team, stay clinically involved. Some people do, some people don't. But it's as you say, Keith, it's a great way to keep up your skills. And so I think when you listen to these different stories, if you want to do stuff like we're doing, you can design a career that will allow you to do, I really believe, almost anything that you want. So thanks so much, Liza.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. And so briefly, I'll just talk about my little scenic route to Bayer Crop Sciences. And it is a scenic route. I started out at the age of 21 working backstage at a rock venue called the Fox Theater here in St. Louis, being an employee of the Rich and Famous and running errands and doing lights and sound and stage management and all that kind of stuff. And my father was a physician, and he asked if we wanted to go to Haiti on a medical mission where we would be volunteering in an orphanage and changing diapers and feeding babies, and he would be doing medical care. And I thought, okay, that's kind of interesting because it was in the 80s. And I thought, I'll try that. And I met a little boy named Fritz who changed my whole life's trajectory. So he was 5 months old, but he looked like a newborn because he had such bad malnutrition. And so I decided wow, what am I doing with my life? Do I really want to be an employee of the rich and famous, or do I want to kind of do something different? And so that prompted me to go to medical school. And so when I was finished with medical school, I decided that I wanted to do emergency medicine because I wanted to be able to get up and do humanitarian relief. And because you get such a great background in so many different things, you can do everything from deliver babies to fix lacks and treat infections. And I'm very interested in tropical medicine as well. You get to see all that. But I realized at the end of my residency, did my residency at WashU. At the end of my residency, that I was really kind of a jack of all trades and a master of none. And so I wanted to stay in academics and get a little bit more of a in-depth topic. So I went ahead and did medical toxicology at NYU for Gold Frank as well. And then came back to St. Louis and started the medical toxicology fellowship at Washington University. And in 2010, there was an earthquake in Haiti. And so I organized a relief mission to Haiti, and went back and found it very much in the same predicament that it had been when I had left 21 years before. And I thought to myself, wow, what, if you're a physician and you go down and do relief missions like this, you're just kind of putting Band-Aids on the problem, because as soon as you leave, your whole skill set goes with you. So what could you do that would make things better, that would be sustainable, that patients would be, or the population would have access to better health and welfare? And what I realized is that what I was seeing I was seeing lots of, trouble from the earthquake, traumatic injuries and delivering babies and things like that. But what I was really seeing underlying a lot of it was malnutrition and insect-borne illness. And so that got me thinking about how to do more global health problems and address things from a global perspective. So I started the global health track for the emergency medicine department, and started reading about golden rice. And golden rice is a genetically modified rice that produces beta carotene, and is used to, the design for it was to prevent vitamin A induced blindness in children. And so vitamin A induced blindness, or deficiency induced blindness, probably occurs in about 350,000 kids a year. And once they go blind, they actually very shortly thereafter wind up often dying. So it's got a very high mortality associated with it. And I thought, wow, this is a rice that you can use to prevent that was designed and given for free worldwide for farmers to replant and stuff. What else don't I know about GMOs? And so I started reading more and more about that. And then I started reading more and more about pesticides. And Dan Goldstein, who was working at Monsanto, the world's most popular company in the world, who followed my career here in St. Louis, sent out an email in December of 2015 saying that he was retiring and that he was looking for a medical toxicologist, and he sent it out to several toxicology groups. Was anybody interested in looking at his job, and he would mentor them for a year or two before he retired? And I thought about it. I thought, do I really know Monsanto? I don't know about that, right? And because of the reputational issues around Monsanto and the reputational issues around big ag. So I waffled a little bit, and then a friend of mine who had a child in my son's class who worked for Monsanto, she was a lawyer for Monsanto, said in February, there's a toxicology job at Monsanto, don't you? And I was like, maybe I should check it. So I got interviewed actually on St. Patrick's Day, and as luck would have it, I got the job. And I have got to tell you, I have not looked back. It's been the most amazing, most challenging and fascinating job that I've ever had. I loved clinical medicine. I loved my boss. I loved the colleagues that I worked with. I loved working at WashU. But this has been just incredibly enlightening. And who'd have thunk that agriculture could be so fascinating? So I started working for Monsanto, and then Bayer bought Monsanto in 2018. They actually announced they were buying Monsanto the day I took the job. So, which was kind of like, oh, I wonder if I'll have a job. But they bought it that, and they kept me on. And what's been even great, so Monsanto was huge in that it's a global company with a big footprint. So I got to work with scientists from all over the world, doing fascinating things. One of the things that I loved about emergency medicine is you could pick the brains of so many different specialties and get to know them and learn something from them. This is amplified that. This is like that on steroids, right? And then when Bayer bought us, wow, we are now the biggest life sciences company in the world. We really practice One Health. Our motto is, health for all and hunger for none. And I've been able to talk to some of the brightest and most interesting people from the pharma division, from the consumer health division, and the crop science division. And it's been just a huge learning experience. I unfortunately haven't had a whole lot of time to practice clinically. I practiced clinically all the way up until 2018 when they wanted me to do 18 hours worth of EPIC training. And I said, no. So the electronic medical record is the reason why I'm not practicing clinically anymore, but I'm not discouraging anybody from making that decision. So with that, and I don't know if Andrew's having difficulty signing on. I don't know if Dia's got anything, but if he can't make it, we can have him come talk some other time. Maybe we can start some cute question and answers with the audience. And I've got a couple of questions for you all if you want me to just kick off. So first of all, how did you both hear about your jobs? One of the things that I hear from people is that, how do you find a job at the FDA, or how do you find a job in industry?
Keith, you want to go?
Well, sure. Actually, I guess I should start. My first transition actually was with the CDC, and so I actually found my FDA job from the CDC, and that as it turned out, and that's because of when I was transitioning out of academics, and that through there, that was kind of the opportunity I have. If you will remember, this was 18 years ago. That was after 9/11. So there was great interest in the government as far as first government toxicology jobs, and that were really, started with the CDC and their initiative after 9/11. So I kind of piggybacked on the second wave of that. And I talked about my contacts within the state government and the federal government through some of that work on chemical terrorism preparedness through there. And that's where I actually was, kind of hired under an interagency agreement back 18 years ago, in which the state was funding, paying 1/3 of my salary, and the federal government was actually paying 2/3 and that through there. So I ended up being a split between the state of Pennsylvania for their chemical terrorism preparedness and environmental health. And that through there, those are the two efforts. And the same thing with the CDC and working with ATSDR. And that through there, both aspects. So I started there, and then one of the things that things to always, I've had this thing of being hired by people that retire soon. And so what happened is the person that hired me on from the state and that retired, and the person taking over, who took over the budget, didn't put me in the budget. So a huge part of my salary went away, and so I needed to look for something new, maybe. and so that's actually what then the CDC worked, and the people down there says maybe as far as put me in contact with the FDA as far as for transitioning up there. And I always loved involved in environmental toxicology, but when I first came up, they actually put me in the office next to the person who was in charge of farm tox up here in the FDA. And at that time, the huge focus on cancer and that part of it, as far as for the farm tox group here at that point. And the whole, what I would say is, I'd sit in some of these meetings and I said, I'm loving the transition from 10 to the -6 toxicity at the FDA to what I call 10 to the -1. and dealing with drugs and having seen all these adverse effects versus cancer and some of the other environmental health. I love that. I love that part of it, and it was great. But I must admit, I really enjoy the clear toxicity that come along with drugs that need to be taken at doses that can bring along some toxicity with their benefit. And so that's kind of become the focus of my med tox career at the FDA. And I still remember those interviews and talking about that. Interviewed with the director for the Office of New Drugs, and one of the things I'll always remember: you will not be bored in this job. There is so much to learn, so much to do, and your brain will just keep expanding with all the things you're going to be able to learn, and that while you're here. And that's turned out to be so absolutely true through there. And the other place I interviewed there is where would I end up? Essentially, this with the people at the CDC put me in contact with the Cedar Center director in that. And the center director says this was an easy interview. The center director said just hire him. And so I interviewed with people that knew they were going to hire me, and that already. And it was where was I going to land and what was I going to do? And that was determined to be with the Division of Anesthesia, Analgesia, and addiction products at that time. So I'm interviewing with the person who approved flamazanil, and as an example, and talking about, I did all that work. I did 4 flamazanil trials. What do you want to know? Through there. So, and that's where I ended up for what I call the 2 to 3 years of training that you have when you start in this job. There's so much to learn in that when you're here. And I ended up being there, and usually they put you on one team, but I worked on all 4 teams and that there. So addiction products, pain product, analgesia products, and the one I actually grew into loving was rheumatology products. Because back then, 15 years ago, I said, we got to really understand how the immune system relates to problems related to drugs that we have. And so I actually then went off to NIH and took immunology courses to start learning to understand a lot of that. So there's another way that you can just continue to have fun and learn and be paid to study and learn more about medical toxicology, as far as how that's grown in that time that I've been here at the FDA. And that's really been my focus. I started a biological plausibility consult service, in which essentially just send me something, an adverse event, and I'll try to figure out what the mechanism is for what's happening, and that with that drug. And played around with informatics programs to try to help understand and predict different things. So I've just been having a blast. Come and join me.
That's so cool. That's so cool. Ed, how about you?
Yeah, no, I think a couple of things that you say there, Keith. I mean, the idea of you get to learn every single day and new challenges come up. And I feel like a lot of what I do, it's like when you're on call for the poison center, right? You have no idea what's coming in. And virtually every single, day you're on call, something would come in. You wouldn't be an expert in it. You'd have to go figure out how to deal with this, or go find, like Liza, you were saying, the world's experts on things, and you get to do that in the job. For my advice to you is there's a couple ways you get in. One, you have expertise in a certain area that a certain company or government agency is looking for, right? And so for me, having done the research on acetaminophen and alcohol, and having been at Rocky Mountain that has such a long legacy of acetaminophen research, that was my in to become the medical director for Tylenol. Liza, you mentioned something that I think is really important, right? There's the legacy of the people who came before us, right? And so Tony Temple had come before me. The company, he did such a great job, and the company realized, hey, there's a benefit for having a medical toxicologist who is connected to the tox community, understands toxicology, to help us manage Tylenol with all of its, associated overdose issues. Liza, you mentioned Dan, right? Dan was there, and he was doing a great job, and they said, hey, let's go find another medical toxicologist. So for anyone out there today, you got Keith, at the FDA, you got Luke Yip at, CDC. Keith, you were there before. You got other toxicologists in multiple different companies. So if you're interested, reach out to us, have a conversation with us. And what I'd say is the probably best way to get a job is to have a contact, just like you're going to get your tox jobs, your ER jobs, right? You go somewhere where you have a contact, somebody you want to go work with. And so there's a lot of people in toxicology today. Become an expert. And then what I would say is that there is a bias within industry around your first job. And I see it all the time when, you know, people are like, oh, well, they don't have any industry experience. And, you know, so you got to break down that a little bit. And so I think people in industry can help you with that. But oftentimes it is getting your foot in the door somewhere. And it may not be the ultimate job that you think you're looking for. And I think, Keith, you said something really important, this idea of, I remember you go in and you think you know something, and then you're like, oh, you're going to ask me to do something that I've never done. And you get a little nervous. And for me, those have been the biggest learning opportunities. So I started just managing Tylenol. It was enough. And then they said, hey, could you take on all the analgesics? And I thought, okay, you know, I could take on ibuprofen and aspirin. They're pretty similar. And then I remember literally there was a safety issue going on at the time around pediatric cough and cold ingredients. And I wasn't really even involved in it, but I was interested. And so I was like, all right, let me get a little bit involved. And over my career, what I've learned is, you know, those opportunities, Keith, where you say like rheumatology, you weren't an expert, but they're opportunities to learn and to grow and develop. And so when you look at opportunities, don't be scared of something that's a little bit outside of what you know, because I am convinced that as toxicologists, you have the fundamental training that's going to allow you to go into so many different therapeutic areas. And once you do it once, the next time you say, okay, I can do it again.
Yeah, and I would say that companies are starting to really start realizing the value of a toxicologist. First of all, we're kind of a rare breed. There are not very many of us medical toxicologists. There are lots of PhD toxicologists in companies, but companies find that the medical background is very, very useful. And who'd have thunk that an ER doctor would wind up in agriculture, right? So they I think have started to really recognize that you have a broad spectrum of knowledge that can be very, very useful for a lot of different positions in companies. If anybody,
Sarah, Lizzie, I just wanted to piggyback on what Ed said there, and that I'm not sure if everyone knows out there and that yet, but finally, after I've been at the FDA for 15 years, I finally have 2 more medical toxicologists here with me, and that now who called me and talked to me about the jobs and all that, and 2 great medical toxicologists that clearly are so well qualified and are landing in great places, and that here within the FDA, and are going to have good careers on their own qualifications. But there's a lot of truth to that as far as for contacts within agencies, as far as for somebody putting in a good word, and that, and being an advocate on your behalf and getting some of those things started. I would certainly stress that. And those, I mean, I can say it's Christina Hensch Bardsley is she's within the Office of Surveillance and Epidemiology in that now. Just started last summer. Doing great work in that there, and working on some bread and butter medical toxicology issues, I could tell you, that facing this the FDA and the nation right now, that's for sure. And then Gina Jacobs just started with non-prescription drug products, and that earlier this month. So we have 3 of us in that here now. I'm getting closer to my retirement age, and that, and I love playing with my grandchildren and that. But I'll have some more people here, and I certainly hope there'll be more that join. The FDA really needs a division of medical toxicology. As you know, what Ed said, it pulled everything. I mean, as Ed knows, I get asked a lot about acetaminophen and that all the time here. All those things you might imagine that he talked about, I'm well aware of, and all across all kinds of other, even cancer drugs, that kind of stuff. There's always something here that can grab your interest and spend a lot of time on. But important to, as Ed says, making those contacts wherever you go. It's always a helpful way. It's still the business model for getting.
Sorry, Buster was saving me from the mailman. Anyway, no, I think that that's very true. And what advice would you give to physicians who are looking for a job outside of the medical world? Is there something that you would tell them in particular that they might not have a window on?
I think
this time, Ed.
a couple things I would say is I think there's a way to do it where it doesn't have to be all or none, right? And so I think sometimes people are worried on a couple things. Am I going to like it, right? Are the people is wherever I go, are they going to like what I'm doing, and am I going to be successful? And when it's your first job, that's natural. But I think there's ways that you can do this potentially even part-time, right? And so you know, we have a medical toxicologist is going to start working with our team part-time, right? To kind of try it out. Do they like it? Do we like them? And I think that'll be fantastic. I think there's a lot of different ways to do it. You can do consulting, right? And so there's always projects that we have, and other companies, I'm sure Liza would say, that you have where you need an extra pair of hands. And if you make it known that it's something that you want to do, then I think it's a great way to learn a little bit about what do each of these companies do, what are the type of projects, figure out if you like it. And so it doesn't have to be all or none. But then I would say, don't be afraid to jump right in, right? Because there are some jobs where they're going to say, I need somebody tomorrow, and take the job. The thing that I would say is, it's like when you have emergency medicine skills or toxicology skills, I would almost say you can almost go anywhere and work in any ER or any poison center, right? And I would say it's always important to say who your mentor is going to be. I think when you're starting in a new area, a new career, my advice is wherever you go, make sure that you've kind of identified somebody, and Keith was saying this a little bit before, like who's going to watch out for you, who's going to teach you, who's going to train you. And I give Dr. Temple, he made my career. And when I first got there, I was with Tony virtually every single day. He taught me how to do things, the right way to do things, how to think about things, the right approaches. And that set me up my whole career. And I try to do that now. And for anyone on our team, and especially, when Tammy Schaefer joined our team as a medical toxicologist, try to do the same for her. So look in that job, who's going to be that mentor, who's going to be that person. And if you have that person, jump right in and they'll take care of you.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that Dan Goldstein was the same exact for me. And my current boss, John Feeney, is exactly like that for me. I've learned so much from them. But I met Dan when I was a third-year resident. And I was interested in what he was doing. And so I think that, sorry about Buster, having kept in touch with him at little touch points during my career, he was able to sort of kind of watch me develop, and then was able to say, hey, I've got this job and this might be something interesting. So over the years of your training, it's important to stay in touch with people who may not even be mentors. They may be just somebody who can sort of give you some advice here and there. But if they're watching you, that can lead to open doors.
The thing I would also say, when it comes to the pharmaceutical industry, I'm in the consumer side of J&J. We have the pharmaceutical side, the device side. Literally a place where you can go, and I can guarantee that almost every single person on this call as a toxicologist can be successful, is safety. And it's crazy. I've seen in the last 2 years, not on our team, but somebody on the farm team, an ER doc came in and they're doing great. When I first joined the company, we had a family practitioner who had just joined our safety team. She's done great. And I look back upon it and I say, as a toxicologist, you are set up with the skills to do even better. And so if you like learning, you're willing to put yourself out there. There are safety jobs all over the place. You can go start looking on LinkedIn, find an introductory safety job. Again, make sure that it's a reputable company. There's a mentor there who's going to help take care of you. But safety is a way for toxicologists in the door. And once you get in, everything opens up.
And I'll just top it on any of as you know, the FDA is efficacy and then safety. That's essentially how it starts and that through here. So, and that was part of the initial training where it looked a lot, a whole bunch more at the efficacy and that as well. I mean, that's a big part of the formula and that here as well. But as I said, and what's Ed saying is, safety was my game. And so that's ultimately where essentially 100% of my time is in that now and what I do through there. But hard work. And that, as you know, we all put in those long hours, and that in our training and, in our jobs, with clinical and all that, that gives you a lot of the knowledge base to really know these safety things. But yeah, and first impressions are important. My day one, I still remember my first assignment. And that 15 years ago from John Jenkins, O&D's director, and at a time, will you take a look at this telithromycin drug for me? And
Wow.
And so that I got all the FAERS narratives my first day, threw them on my desk, and that through there. I guess I could say at this point, they were saying, oh, I think this was the acetaminophen they were taking. That was, I think Bill Lee was saying that.
Yeah.
And so I looked at these cases, read all of them, and I said, no, I don't think so. I said, telithromycin, I think, is one of these rare drugs that can cause hepatocellular necrosis, cholestatic injury, and autoimmune. When I looked at all those cases and looking at structure on how compared to other drugs, and I think that's borne out. I think people would believe that and that now, and that changed. There was an advisory committee that came up after that and really reviewed this, and I guess I'll just say the rest is history.
And you're bringing up something really important, and I think it's the idea of impact, right? And so I love, as all of us have said, we love taking care of patients, and I love the impact that you can have taking care of somebody at the bedside, and there's almost nothing better than that, right? That person that you help there. But in these different jobs that you can do as a toxicologist, whether it's in industry or a regulatory authority or a public health agency, you get to have impact. And Keith, you just described it. Right? Look at the impact that Keith had identifying that adverse event, and saving countless people for decades to come because it was identified early who weren't going to develop that adverse event. And I feel like in the work that I get to do in the company, and I know Liza the same way, you get to have that type of impact. And that is very, very rewarding.
It really is.
Yeah, it really is. It's when I think about the overarching importance of agriculture. Agriculture is the foundation of civilization. The reason why we can all sit here on this TV screen is because we're not out growing our own food in our little plot of land. And so when I think about how we've had 10,000 years of experience with organic farming and 50 years of food security in the West, that's because of really unbelievable scientific advances in agriculture that very few people understand. When I talk about them and I see how it makes people realize how lucky we are, this is just the impact of this industry is incredible, and it's vital for civilization. And it blows me away all the time. I think about pesticides, and people get concerned about pesticides, and understandably so. But pesticides are actually critical for public health. I mean, unless you want to bring back diseases of the Middle Ages like the plague and, typhus, and, in developing countries, you've got malaria as one of the leading causes of death worldwide. And, so I think that there needs to be a much more balanced discussion about pesticides that we don't have. And that's because there are not very many people who see it from that perspective or learn about it from that perspective. So when I have these conversations, I find that they're really challenging because lots of people have questions about Monsanto and big ag and, in industry, and they have understandable questions, right? But I've come to learn how my impressions of all those things were maybe not quite balanced enough because I'd only thought about it from one perspective. So for me, it's been great. It's been an eye opener, and I think it's very, very impactful, like Ed says and like Keith says.
And I think that's one of the things that, an elephant on the table is, not so much when you go to work for FDA or CDC, but if you go to work for private industry, are you going to be forced to do things that, are against your individual ethics or, against the Hippocratic oath? And what I can say is, I can only talk about my career within Johnson & Johnson, but I can tell you, I've, forced the company to do a good number of things that they didn't want to do. I've never gone along with anything that at the end of the day, I thought was unethical or wasn't in the best interest of patients. And I was always ready, and I've kept up all my, my ER boards, my tox boards, and all my certifications. So, because I think it makes me have better judgment, that I was never beholden to the company. And I've always said, and I'd have this conversation with my wife, hey, but at the end of the day, the company's not willing to do what I think the right thing, and not just me, but our safety team or our medical team, and is the right thing, then we'll part ways. And in 16 years, I feel very comfortable about the decisions that I've been involved with. And can I say I've been involved in every decision within the company? No, but on the safety issues, and the company has always done what we as the medical professionals thought the right thing to do is. And so, and there's so many ethical companies out there that I just want to kind of put that on the table, because I think you really can still be very ethical, and we need ethical people in industry to help make those decisions. And by you coming in, you will be helping actually patients and consumers, because you are going to guide the company to make those right decisions. And it's important. I think every pharmaceutical company of decent size should have a medical toxicologist involved. Almost like Keith's saying, you could use more in public health and regulatory authorities around the world too.
Yeah, it's a very much needed specialty. It's a very much needed specialty. And then once again, back into the industry side of things, we are very, very tightly regulated. There's, and I think Keith can attest to, the FDA side of things, but there are very strict parameters around trials, around results, around adverse effects that are reportable. So and those trials are conducted and studies are conducted under a certain set of parameters called good laboratory practice. And that is a set of rules that is put together by regulators that people who are with companies that are conducting testing on products have to abide by those rules. The protocols are written by regulators, and that's in order for the results to be validated, reproducible, and they're all reportable. So that when I learned about GLP, it gave me much more, and that's true for agricultural products as well as pharmaceutical products and consumer health products. So that gave me a lot more faith in, when they talk about in medicine, journals published articles and you can't reproduce any of them, right? You can reproduce these. And so there are measures that are taken to keep things on the up and up. And I think that it's really important that people understand that, because we've got such an incredible quality of life due to the ability to have access to these products. So I think they're really important.
I can't help but jump in on this. One of the other nice things that often happens at the FDA is that there's a lot of husband-wife teams. There's a lot of spouses that work here and 5 years after I've been at the FDA, there were one of those hiring surges. It's one thing with the government, there's often hiring surges. So it's easier. There's times through the cycle that more opportunities are there than others. But 5 years after I joined, this was one of those opportunities. So my wife joined here in that as well. She's a practitioner, and that actually worked on the division of psychiatry products for her beginning of her career. But then of interest to you guys, she now works for the Office of Compliance.
That's great. That's fascinating. Does anybody from the audience have any questions? Because we can continue talking, but I want to make sure we're covering your all questions.
we have a nice conversation amongst ourselves, entertain ourselves. It's awesome, Keith, to see. And Liza, you and I have talked, recently, but it's fun. It's fun.
Yes, we're very good at talking. Anybody? I don't see anything.
I've been watching the chat. No, nothing in the chat there.
Nothing in the chat.
Other thing I'd say, people have a question like, how hard are you going to work? Right. And I'll tell you, like the first day I came out for an interview at the J&J facility, and I remember there was like a couple tennis courts outside and a basketball court. And as I was driving in, there was a golf course across the street. And I thought to myself, oh, this is going to be awesome, man. I'm gonna be able to play some tennis. And like, I've never been on that tennis court. I've never been on that basketball court, and I've never been on that golf course. And so what I can tell you is, if you think you're going to do this because it's going to be easier, what I would say is I was working hard prior to coming in, because I was in a private ER group prior to coming in. I was the ER director for one of our hospitals. I was volunteering at the Poison Center, doing rounds a couple times a week. I was doing my research at the Poison Center, and I pick up a few extra shifts at Denver Health, and so I was working hard. I work harder today. The difference is that, I can align my schedule a little bit better when I need to with my family. And so I have 3 kids. I have 2 in college and one in high school. And the beauty over the past 16 years has been that even if I'm on vacation and I need to take a call, and there's many times I've been, right, on beach vacation, the family's like, why is Ed walking off into the dunes taking calls? Because I had calls going on at work. But I was able to be with my family. Whereas like when you're working in the ER, or I guess in the Poison Center, you could do call from almost anywhere. So that has been the value for me. But don't think you're going to come in and this is going to be, easy, because it isn't easy, but it will allow you to align your schedule potentially a little bit better.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. I've been surprised at how much work I actually do. But once again, I love it, and it is much more flexible than being on a shift in the ER.
Right.
It's much more predictable. It's much more flexible. If you have something going on with a kid at home, my kid at home now, he's sick, so I've been able to do stuff with him. It's a different kind of lifestyle, but you will actually work very, very hard, very, very hard.
Well, I'll have to jump in and say I work a lot less here at the FDA than what I did before coming here. And that's as you heard, I was for 15 years through there, very, very long days. 80-hour work weeks wasn't unusual when I first started through there, especially trying to launch a academic career. At that point, part of why I was always thinking about a public health career afterwards. But so yeah, and especially the family time. The weekends are often very free, and that through here sometimes there's things that have to be done, and so you on there. But most of my weekends are very, very free, and that to have that family time. When I was working those long hours in academics, fortunately I lived just minutes away from the hospital, so I'd always home for dinner with the kids, and that was like a major priority, and then often go back and see patients again in the evenings. But here I got to share a great story. When I first started working for the CDC, I got this call from Ed Kilborn. He says, "What are you doing working on the weekend?" Because my liability insurance from the government didn't cover me working doing clinical duty on the weekend, and that your coverage for the tort reform that I have is only during that like 8 to 5 hours.
Wow.
So that was one thing.
Oh wow!
I had to call up Ward and tell him, Ward, I can't work on the weekends for you or the evenings anymore. So,
wow.
Clinical coverage essentially was just going in and picking up the service from 8 to 5 my clinical days, and got to go home and sleep in my own bed and not be worried about.
Pretty good.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
So that alone can tell you how it became a little easier job. And
yeah.
But the job's what you want to hear, especially what you want to make it. And you can, work a lot longer hours than I have at times. But there's always the ability to focus on, a lot of focus for the family. And now, as I said, have these other two medical toxicologists. My work volume starting to go down. Places where I used to get tons of consults, and all of a sudden they're like, I shared one of these things. We can call Keith for this if you don't have time to do it.
That's perfect.
I love it.
That's great. That's great. Ed, what's your favorite thing about your job?
I think it's the ability to have the type of impact that I think we can. I feel very good about that. Like, you leave a legacy from a public health perspective of doing the right thing. And I think it's the learning that comes with it. I feel like it's when you were doing rounds, right? You're like, all right, I got to figure out, I got to make, like, you have a few really smart fellows. You're like, all right, I got to make sure I'm studying up a little bit to make sure I know more than they do so I can teach them something. And I feel like within the company, every single day, I am like learning something new and, having to dig into the literature. And Liza, like you said, get to talk to world's experts on different topics. And that I love it.
Yeah. What about you, Keith?
Same thing. And I really, the new knowledge that I gain every single day is just amazing. And especially for the FDA. And, you look at the explosion on using real world evidence of that now. That's an area where we are experts. I mean, look at what we have to do. We have to evaluate real world evidence without having the stellar clinical trials and that through here. And I think that is something that's really needed, and I think's helped within my career at the FDA. I mean, I developed data mining programs to look at adverse events of drugs from across different classes, and as far as for trying to understand and analyze the toxicity and explain it by off-target mechanisms. I have programs that predict off-targets and that on drugs that help me look and oh my gosh, no surprise, it does this at this drug, these older, especially the older drugs, which we're still looking at for adverse events. And even now, some drugs come in that, haven't had as good of a off-target screen as you might expect. And some of these things help you piece together, and give you a good hypothesis of what may be going on for doing some more in-depth evaluation of a drug.
Yeah, that's so cool. I've got to say my favorite part of the job is the different projects that I've worked on. So I'm right now working on a course through ACMT where fellows are rotating with us. And it's been like being back and teaching in academics. It's been fantastic. It's been really wonderful. And then I'm also working at where we've got a project where there's an outreach project where Bayer's committed to training 100 million smallholder farmers in the safe use of products, and as well as farming techniques to improve their yields and things like that. So agronomy, plant pathology, those kinds of things. As part of that, they're doing a worldwide outreach to rural healthcare workers to help sort of amplify the health aspects: occupational injury, heat illness, snake bite, pesticide exposure, malnutrition, all of that. So I feel like it's very in line with what I started doing, and it's come to like one big loop. So very cool international projects, and once again with brilliant scientists. It's really fulfilling and wonderful. And we're at the hour. I can't thank you both enough. It was really, really great to see you and hear about your careers. And Paul, I'll let you have some closing comments.
Well, thanks, Liza and Ed and Keith. I work closely with all three of you, but I learned a lot over the last hour. It was really fascinating, and I think we'll continue to do this sort of program from time to time. I think many of our members can learn so much about what medical toxicologists are doing, which may be a little bit different than the traditional career path in emergency medicine and with a clinical service. And as I've been listening to you all over the last hour, I've been thinking about others who are also involved with some of these alternative career paths. And I think there's a lot for all of us to bring back to the membership about the paths that you've all paved because and also the importance of mentorship and developing a pipeline, and the fact that there are opportunities out there, but you have to go, look for them. They don't necessarily get landed onto your lap. So again, thank you very much, the three of you, for sharing your personal stories with everyone today. And we have several additional webinars in this webinar series over the next few months, and we'll continue to develop this program over the next couple of years, hopefully as well. Thanks again, and thanks, Liza, for organizing this.
Thanks so much, everybody. Had a
Thank
good
you.
time.
This is
Thank
great.
you.
Really
Bye-bye.
enjoyed it.
It was
Everyone
fun.
have a good day.